Hey guys, so a while back I uploaded a couple videos about Orion biology and Orion history. These videos were made years apart, so I think my presentation has changed quite a bit, but nevertheless, I thought some of you might like a supercut version of these videos. So here it is. And don't forget to subscribe, because there's more where that came from. Hey guys, what's up? Tyler here. One of the most identifiable races from the Star Trek franchise, dating all the way back to the original series, is the Orion species. Characterized by their green complexion, their reputation for piracy, and their sensual nature, the Orions operate one of the most significant trade networks in the Alpha and Beta quadrants. But today, beyond just their socio-political and economic affairs, I'd like to explore more deeply their biology and how it has influenced their standing on the interstellar stage. This is Star Trek Alien Biology, the Orions. One of the most striking aspects about the Orions is, as I mentioned earlier, their green skin. This has made them iconic in popular culture as an instantly recognizable element of the original series. Their first appearance in canon was the Season 1 episode of the original series, The Menagerie, which featured footage from the unaired pilot, The Cage. In the final draft of the script for The Cage, a line of dialogue that ultimately didn't make into the episode implied that green Orions were actually rare. This is likely because Gene Roddenberry had originally envisioned the Orions as having more variation, but due to budget constraints, this never came to fruition. They've also been known to possess hair color variations that include red, black, and green. Fun fact, when the green Orion makeup was originally tested on Module Barrett and Susan Oliver, the post-production lab sent back the footage 3 times before Gene Roddenberry had to tell them that the Orions were supposed to be green. In universe, it's interesting to consider what sort of evolutionary conditions would have led a sentient humanoid species to developing a green skin complexion. Some non-canon sources speculate that Orion's skin pigments are actually based on chlorophyll, much like Earth plants which have chloroplasts. Now this might initially seem like a silly idea, as there's nothing other than green skin color to connect the Orions with Terran plant life. This actually might have some credence. As I explained in my video about the Asari from Mass Effect, the coloration of various extraterrestrial species is likely heavily influenced by the wavelengths that are emitted by their planet's host star. In the Orion's case, their star, Pi 3 Orionis, is an F-type yellow-white star that is slightly hotter than ours. Because they are hotter, F-type stars, which have slightly shorter lifespans than our Sun, by definition emit more light in the blue portion of the visible spectrum. Light of these wavelengths is more energetic and thus, being closer to the UV end of the spectrum, more harmful in high concentrations. It's for this reason that life on a planet orbiting an F-type star would need some kind of UV protection layer, such as an ozone layer. In the absence of such shielding, DNA molecules on planets such as these would suffer between 2.5 and 7.1 times the amount of damage caused by UV radiation than on Earth. The coloration of pigments in life found around F-type stars is, of course, subject to some debate, since we've obviously only observed life on one planet, Earth. But the knowledge that we do have regarding solar radiation and the way that various pigments absorb and reflect this radiation can give us some clues. As I just mentioned, F-type stars emit more light in the blue portion of the spectrum than our Sun, and thus, according to astronomers, pigments in life found around these stars would behave in one of 2 ways. On the one hand, they could reflect this higher energy blue light and thus give off a bluer tint. Or they could absorb only the blue light and reflect lower energy wavelengths, namely red, yellow, and, you guessed it, green. And of course, as we see on Orion, the plant life is in fact green, just like the people who inhabit it. The sky even possesses a greenish tint, which is rather unexpected. It would still probably be blue around an F-type star, but maybe there are other gases in the atmosphere that affect the scattering of shorter wavelengths. Anyway, just like the other life on their planet, Orions may have skin pigments that are similar to chlorophyll. Additionally, non-canon sources describe historical populations of Orions with gray and red complexions, meaning that they may have had other pigments. This could jive with the concept of life on a planet orbiting an F-class star, reflecting more than just one narrow color band in the visible spectrum. However, these alternate colored Orions have not been featured in canon. Given that Orion's blood is green, it may also use the protein chlorocruorin, or a copper-based variant of hemoglobin, or even some combination of the two. Chlorocruorin is found in some marine worms, but is actually bright green as opposed to the darker green found in Vulcans and presumably Orions. Regarding the age of their host star, whose real-world analog is noted on a star map in Star Trek Picard, Pi 3 Orionis is only 1.4 billion years old, according to the best estimates. Now, you might ask, what does this have to do with anything? Well, if we were to believe that humanoid life in the galaxy is in fact descended from a progenitor race as suggested in The Chase, then this presents two possibilities. Either the primordial genetic code of various species was transmitted via panspermia to planets younger than 4.5 billion years old, possibly by some mechanism like the mycelial network.
The mycelial network is like
mycelial network! Or Pi 3 Orionis is not the Orion's original homeworld. In fact, both could be true and not be mutually exclusive. The Orions are said to have once been a highly advanced civilization with a rich archaeological history. The dawn of their civilization was even witnessed by the USS Enterprise crew in the pilot episode of the animated series Yesteryear. Non-canon sources suggest that their true origins have been wrapped up in mystery and marked by outside interference. They may have even been slaves themselves at one point, continuing the practice after they rebelled against their oppressors. This murkiness might be indicative that the Orions originally evolved on a planet in another solar system, and that Pi 3 Orionis is merely their current home system, possibly dating back only a few thousand years. Whatever the case, Orion society, commonly recognized in conjunction with their slave trade, is largely influenced by yet another distinct biological characteristic: pheromones. Orion females are known to emit highly powerful pheromones that affect the physiology of other species. In heterosexual males of some species, these pheromones can trigger aggression and, in some cases, after cumulative exposure, trigger delusions of suggestibility. Heterosexual human females are shown to be unaffected by the pheromones and, in fact, react negatively to them. And some species with higher mental disciplines, such as Vulcans, are effectively immune. Not all Orion females emit or utilize these pheromones, however, including Divana Tendi, my wife. These pheromones are, of course, commonly associated with Orion's slave women, a concept that is featured in multiple episodes of Enterprise. But of course, as we learn in the 22nd century, it is not the women who are the slaves, but the men. The women use their pheromones to wield power over their male counterparts. Some members of the Orion Syndicate even use the pheromones to affect the behavior of would-be slave masters of other species, with the true arrangement of gender roles in their society not being widely known for a very long time. Orion women would perpetuate this deception by allowing themselves to be sold on slave markets. It is possible that this arrangement has been reversed by the 23rd century, or perhaps the perception maintained. But by the late 24th century, as we learn in Lower Decks, slavery and piracy have been outlawed in Orion society. Sexual dimorphism in Orions has also been more or less the norm in terms of the ones that we see on screen. Enterprise was actually the first time that we saw Orion males in live action. In Enterprise, males are shown to be bald, muscular, and very tall. But Star Trek Discovery has shown more variety not only in Orion's skin color, but also in the physical build of males. They're not all gigantic dudes. Imagine that. Variety of appearance in a humanoid species. Discovery also shows Orions engaged in bisexual polyamorous activity and introduces other facts about Orion biology, such as their hearts having 6 valves and being able to pump blood in both directions. Orions are a really fascinating species to me, particularly because we don't know as much about them in canon as we do about other species. Their history, as I mentioned, is clouded in mystery. Their culture, while dominated by piracy in older installments, is given more dimension in the newer installments. And their society and government being totally separate and independent from the Federation, a supposed utopia of the galaxy, is also very interesting to me. I haven't delved as deeply into Orion history and politics in this video, as those topics have been covered in detail by other YouTubers, as have elements of their biology as well. But I think the fact that we're seeing more of them these days is a great opportunity to expand on what has historically been a rather one-note species. Hey guys, Tyler here. The Orions are one of the most recognizable alien species in Star Trek. Originating from a planet of the same name, Orions are notorious for interstellar piracy, particularly through the Orion Syndicate, and later the Emerald Chain. Having once harbored a highly advanced civilization, Orions and their history have drawn great interest from both Federation historians and archaeologists alike. But how much do we really know about Orion history? I've already made a video on this channel about Orion's biology and evolutionary history, and as many of you might remember, it's the source of what is perhaps the single longest running meme on my channel, besides mycelial network. Not all Orion females emit or utilize these pheromones, however, including Divana Tindi, my wife. But I haven't yet explored the development of their civilization and their cultural practices. Of course, while we see plenty of interactions with Orions across the various Trek series, there's only so much info about their history from canon, and non-canon accounts can be incredibly contradictory and difficult to parse. But in this video, I'll try to construct a rough timeline of Orion history. Fair warning though, I'm going to engage in some speculation, but that's part of the fun, right? Let's get started. I won't rehash every detail I mentioned in my Orion biology video, but seeing as their evolutionary history is still on topic, I'll reiterate some of the most relevant points. As I've discussed before on this channel, the Orion homeworld orbits the real F-class star Pi 3 Orionis. Given that Pi 3 Orionis is only 1.4 billion years old, it's possible that the Orions might have evolved on another planet, with Orion merely being their current homeworld. This is because it took humans 4.5 billion years to evolve on Earth, as our planet underwent many climatic changes early in its geologic history that made it unsuitable for aerobic or oxygen-breathing life. Of course, Orion could have had a more stable atmosphere early on, much like Mars and Venus are believed to have had billions of years ago. Either way, this very tidbit, the idea that Orions are from somewhere other than Orion, is vaguely hinted at in old non-canon reference modules like Fass's Orions, the Book of Common Knowledge, and the Book of Deep Knowledge. Extensively throughout these accounts, it's suggested that the Orions and their ancestral homeworld are actually in the Rigel system, and in fact they may have been planted there by other ancient aliens. I've made a video about the Rigel system in Star Trek where I break down its history in canon and non-canon, including the existence of a race called the Masters, who possibly engaged in star-lifting, terraforming, and seeding of intelligent life throughout the Rigel system. But suffice it to say, the association between the Orions and Rigel is antiquated and has no bearing on the modern Trek continuity. In any event, it's difficult to say for sure what their true origin point is, but we know for sure that their current homeworld, at least, orbits Pi 3 Orionis. Throughout this video, I'll continue to reference the FASA chronology occasionally, but I'll be sure to point out when I do so to avoid confusion. One thing that can be agreed upon, regardless of the source, is that in-universe, Orion historical records are a very valuable resource. Just how deep such archives go, however, is debatable. It's very likely, in my view, that many Orion records have been outright destroyed over the centuries, and much of their history has devolved into myth and legend. There are lots of parallels to real-life history that can be drawn here, not just in regards to lost information about ancient civilizations, but also the contemporary destruction of historical sites sites by militant groups in war-torn parts of the world. Even more recent accounts probably represent the views of powerful families and businesses, since we know from canon that Orion's society is more or less dominated by the Syndicate. This even includes Divana Tendi's family, as in the late 24th century, the Tendis are the 5th wealthiest family in the Syndicate overall. That is, until their wealth is confiscated in Season 5, but that's neither here nor there. The FASA module, the Book of Deep Knowledge, while again full of information that's since been contradicted, also suggests that there are multiple subspecies of Orion. Indeed, the blue-skinned Orions from the animated series episode The Pirates of Orion also show back up again in the Lower Decks Season 5 episode Dos Cerritos, where they are confirmed to be a patriarchal subset of the Orion species, although going as far as to call them a subspecies may be inaccurate. They're probably just a distinct ethnic group. Surviving Orion records being difficult to obtain is another common theme throughout the FASA chronology, and I think that might apply to canon as well. In fact, this may be the very reason that the crew of Kirk's Enterprise used the Guardian of Forever to observe the dawn of Orion's civilization in the animated series episode Yesteryear. For the record, I always thought it was kind of weird that they were engaging in such brazen time travel activity in an era where the temporal prime directive is supposed to have existed. Although we do know from DS9's Trials and Tribulations that Kirk has at least 17 temporal violations on record. Regardless, with the added context of a timeline of Orion history being incredibly difficult to piece together, going back and observing it directly makes more sense. And it's interesting to consider how this builds upon the events of the Strange New Worlds episode, Those Old Scientists, in which Pike's Enterprise has a pivotal encounter with an Orion science vessel studying alien time travel technology. Anyway, I think it's fair to say that despite the Enterprise's observations, large elements of Orion history are still currently unknown to us, the audience. Two things we know about Orion evolution, besides the fact they have green skin, is that on Orion, there is no sand and there are no dogs. Right now, you might be wondering, what the hell is he talking about? But no, seriously, these two facts about Orion have stuck with me ever since they were stated by Tendi in Lower Decks, because they have implications about Orion anthropology and technological development. Let's take sand first.
I don't like sand. It's coarse and rough and irritating, and it gets everywhere.
Something that a lot of people might not think about or realize is that technically on Earth, sand is a non-renewable resource. Each year, 50 billion tons of beach and fossil sand are used for construction and making concrete, although plentiful desert sand is not suitable for concrete. That said, if there's no sand on Orion, only sharp pebbles, that probably tells us that there aren't any deserts in the way we'd know them on Orion. The few looks we get of the planet Orion in canon from Lower Decks depict a verdant world with presumably a warm global climate. On Earth, the most common constituent of sand in inland continental areas and non-tropical coastal areas is silica, or silicon dioxide, usually in the form of the crystalline mineral quartz. Because of its chemical inertness and considerable hardiness, quartz is very resistant to weathering. In tropical and subtropical settings, bright white sands form from eroded limestone and often contain coral and shell fragments, as well as other organic matter. Some sand rich in magnetite, which appears dark in color, is derived from volcanic activity, which is widely considered to be a major driver of natural selection itself. Meaning igneous rocks like basalt and obsidian, which make up 90% of volcanic rocks on Earth, may be present on Orion, but not considered sand in the traditional sense. Further, many sands in areas like southern Europe have iron impurities that give them a different color too. So perhaps silicate rocks on Orion are mixed with other chemicals that prevent them from appearing like Earth sand does. The chemical composition of Orion's crust may be different from Earth's, and in fact, we know that Mars's crust is twice as rich in iron as Earth's, bolstering the idea that other rocky planets could have more iron impurities that affect the appearance of silicate rocks. The size of sand grains is also determined by the amount of weathering and erosion that happens to sediments over time, usually from granite, a byproduct of magma, containing the silicate mineral feldspar, which makes up 60% of the Earth's crust. Feldspar dissolves faster than quartz, causing rocks to break apart into small pieces. Sand dunes are also a consequence of dry equatorial conditions with no water or vegetation, whereas the amount of moisture in Orion's atmosphere may mean that dry conditions are just never present on its surface long enough for sand dunes to form. Further, 70% of the Sahara Desert is made up of bare rock, the reason desert sand is unusable for construction, though it's typically rounded, not sharp. The closest thing I can think of to what KinzieK is talking about is grus, or grus. I don't really give a shit how it's pronounced. Or recently weathered quartz sand with angular crystals, which is still suitable for use in concrete and potting soil. Also called sharp sand in the construction industry, it's closer to gravel than play sand. So that may be the best equivalent, especially since gravel is a byproduct of weathering bedrock. Did I just spend several minutes talking about sand in an Orion history video? You bet your ass I did. One other thing I forgot to mention when I originally made this video, this history portion of the video about the sand, is that if Orion truly does lack sand in the way that we understand it, that would likely hinder the Orion's development of advanced electronics. This is because, of course, the silicon in sand is used in industrial processes to manufacture these kinds of technologies. One way they could get around this is to use some other material like graphite, or they could go through the more laborious process of breaking down the larger chunks of silicate rock that would make up the planet's crust. Alternatively, they could have obtained advanced computing technology from some other species, some other alien species, like how the Klingons are believed to have obtained warp drive from the Herc, or even better yet, they could have brought technology with them from a prior homeworld. Anyway, back to the video. Alright, now let's talk about dogs. The domestication of dogs from wolves has a long history, and one of the most important transitions in our development was the domestication of animals overall. We know Orions have clearly domesticated some animals, like riding animals similar to rhinoceroses. But what specific anthropological differences could have arisen from this lack of dogs? Well, on Earth, domestication of dogs predates agriculture, possibly by some 10 to 20,000 years in Eurasia. Dogs were the first species we domesticated and the only animal we are known to have entered a relationship with during the Ice Age. It wasn't until later that people in the Near East entered into relationships with populations of wild aurochs, boar, sheep, and goats. And our association with dogs may have resulted in a profound influence on the development of civilization. As archaeologist and geneticist Gregor Larson said, remove domestication from the human species and there's probably a couple million of us on the planet, max. For most of human history, we're not dissimilar to any other wild primate. We're manipulating our environments, but not on a scale bigger than, say, a herd of African elephants. And then we go into partnership with this group of wolves. They altered our relationship with the natural world. While it's not exactly known how humans and wolves got together, clearly the fact that we did changed the course of history. Whether we tamed wolves in the traditional sense or wolves approached us first, or a mix of both, there's a reason the dog is called man's best friend. And the fact that they're carnivores is also considered important, with at least one paper suggesting it may have been inevitable that the first species we domesticated was a carnivore, given they're less afraid when approaching other species. Wolves also happened to have the right temperament, being the most gregarious and cooperative animals on Earth. Dogs even suffer from many of the same diseases as humans, have more similar cognition to us than we do with chimpanzees, and have migrated with us as we spread out across the world. So if dogs really were a catalyst for human civilization, whether Orions had an ice age or not, how did they make the transition from Paleolithic to Neolithic to Bronze Age and recorded history? Well, they probably just domesticated some other animal, you know, one that filled the niche of a dog, but wasn't actually called a dog. moving on, I think that this is a good place to pivot again to discussing Orion's slavery and piracy. The FASA chronologies extensively discuss how the Orions as a people were enslaved by other alien races, although it's hard to speak to such an aspect of their history in canon. But despite all the equivocation I've done thus far with the sand and the dogs and shit, one thing that we can say with confidence is that slavery and piracy have probably been integral for a long time. Indeed, while not canon, the novelization of yesteryear suggests that slavery was present in Orion society from a very early stage, as evidenced by the crew's escapade in their past. And as far as piracy, FASA also suggests it originated as part of Orion's attempts to obtain technology from other races to build warp drives and travel to other star systems. This is vaguely similar to how the Ferengi are said to have purchased warp drive rather than developing it themselves, although once again, it's hard to say in canon whether the Orions effectively stole warp technology. I made a video asking this question about the Klingons, and I concluded that in addition to being unproven, it's also kind of insulting to suggest that some of these species didn't have the technical knowledge to invent warp drive on their own. That said, Orions have likely had numerous colony worlds for centuries, if not millennia. This could explain why even more recent media, like some of the Kelvin timeline tie-in comics, place the Orion homeworld in the Epsilon Orionis system, despite earlier sources already establishing it as Pi 3 Orionis. Exactly how long Orions have been spacefaring is nearly impossible to answer in canon, but non-canon accounts definitely characterize them as an ancient civilization that traveled to the stars millennia ago. Early Orion expansion might have occurred millennia in the past, so perhaps the blue Orions are actually a genetic offshoot of the green Orions, like how the Romulans are offshoots of the Vulcans. Hard to say what is and isn't true with a fictional alien species. Shades of Green also confirms that centuries ago, the Orions used solar sail ships like the ancient Majorans. For what it's worth, Enterprise confirms the Orions had been trading with Corridon for several centuries before 2155, meaning they definitely have had warp drive for way longer than humans. But either way, at some point, it's understood that they had a great civilization that has since fallen by the wayside, perhaps similarly to the fall of the Roman Empire on Earth. There I go again, you know what they say, guys think about the Roman Empire at least once a day. As a matter of fact, the Orion Empire, if you want to call it that, probably had several iterations that rose and fell over a long time span. They developed technologies that archaeologists would later find useful for revolutionizing medicine, for instance, as stated by Roger Corby in the original series episode, What Are Little Girls Made Of? It's a very weird title. On the social level, slavery has likely existed to fill labor roles for centuries, and we'll get into the gender dynamics of Orion slavery later in this video. But the question is, did the piracy come before or after the slavery? While Pi 3 Orionis is roughly as rich in metals as our sun, it's definitely possible that Orion piracy did originate as part of an effort to obtain resources from other star systems, like the Cardassians did, and then the slavery followed, somewhat like the Bajoran occupation. But equally as likely, in my opinion, is that piracy was significantly less common early in Orion history until some cataclysmic event occurred that left Orion society in shambles, and many Orions turned to piracy out of pure survival instinct. Up to this point, the evidence presented on screen doesn't contradict either scenario, but my gut feeling says it's more consistent with the latter option. FASA does factor in a fall of Orion civilization that's consistent with statements made in canon, where large networks of Orion colonies suffered rebellions and loss of social cohesion and centralized authority. Such a fate must have befallen the Orion people for the Syndicate to have arisen and permeated so thoroughly throughout what remained of Orion society, to the point where they seem like the de facto government of Orion by the 24th century. This is where many Orion records would have been destroyed, and new ones would have been written in a sort of post-truth era like the one many academics are warning about in the midst of our current volatile political climate. It's likely that the Orions entered a dark age and eventually came out the other side a changed people. They may have had a vast empire at one point like Sargon's race from the original series episode, Return to Tomorrow. But in the modern era, Orions control a significantly smaller area of space than most other neighboring powers in the Alpha and Beta quadrants. They'd have to reinvent certain technologies from scratch, perhaps copying and forging starship designs of other species as suggested by FASA, a clear demonstration of how piracy has become mainstream. Could this be a possible future for humanity as well? Us becoming pirates in an era where our current civilization has fallen? Kind of like Mad Max in space? Is Orion Society just Firefly? You tell me. They're not pirates in Firefly, shut up. Other non-canon sources like Decipher and Last Unicorn role-playing modules detail various interactions over the centuries between Orions and other species like the De Bruyn, Tholians, and more. In the 22nd century, the Vulcans are at least aware of the Orion's existence, and Tellarites are seen participating in the Orion slave market. The Tellarites do, however, push for an embargo against the Orions during the formation of the Coalition of Planets, claiming several of their freighters have been attacked by the Orions. Given their long history of trade, the Caridonites consider these claims to be dubious, although 100 years later, as seen in the TOS episode Journey to Babel, Orion smugglers actively raid dilithium from Corridon. The Babel Conference over Corridon's admission to the Federation jeopardizes future Orion raids, as Corridon would become subject to Federation law. Despite an outward disposition of neutrality, Orions circumvent this neutrality by attacking the USS Enterprise in the form of a stealth agent surgically altered to appear Andorian. Luckily, the spy's cover is blown, and the Federation avoids interplanetary war, a war that would have benefited the Orions as they could supply dilithium to both sides. Orion's neutrality slips even further later in the 23rd century when they engage in armed border conflicts with the Klingons, although they do have an embassy on Kronos as seen in Discovery. And of course, some Orions do join Starfleet, such as Gala in the Kelvin Timeline movies, and later Devana Tendi in the 24th century of the Prime Universe. By the 24th century, the Syndicate has eyes and ears on a large number of worlds, as it probably has for hundreds of years already. But while the Orion's relations with other species in the 22nd, 23rd, and 24th centuries can be observed from watching the shows, I want to hone in a little more on their practice of slavery before I end this video. Famously, Orions are one of the first alien species to be featured in all of Star Trek, dating back to the iconic appearance of the Orion slave girl in the original TOS pilot, The Cage. The Orion slave girl has come to be embodied in popular culture as a major sci-fi trope, the hot alien babe, which interestingly enough was a major inspiration for the creation of the Asari species in Mass Effect. As I've spoken about before on this channel, Enterprise flipped the script and confirmed that in the 22nd century at least, it's not the women who are the slaves in Orion society, but the men. Women would often pose as slaves and let themselves be sold in order to entice males of other species with their powerful pheromones, as seen in the episode Bound. By the 24th century, the Orions are a somewhat more fleshed out matriarchal culture, as seen in Lower Decks, and we also find out that only a fraction of Orion women even possesses pheromones in the first place. While the consensus is that there are no unambiguously matriarchal human societies on Earth, there are some other animal species where females exhibit more dominant behavior, like spotted hyenas, elephants, lemurs, and bonobos. This can be true even if the males are larger and physically stronger, like in bison. But one question I've had for a while is, were women ever slaves in Orion history? Did the men rise up in the 23rd century and enslave the women, only for the women to rise up again, but this time forge a society with de jure equal rights? Were men and women slaves in ancient times, or was it one or the other? I can't answer any of these questions, although I do invite speculation in the comments, because honestly, this topic is a lot more fascinating than it might seem at first. And it opens up a broader discussion about the gender relations of other Star Trek aliens as a reflection of gender relations on Earth in the present. So to give my 2 cents, here's what I think could characterize a coherent chronology, that's a lot of alliteration, of Orion history. Millennia ago, I do think that the Orion's ancestors were transplanted to their current homeworld by a race of ancient aliens, or settled on it as an ancient colony world after developing spaceflight themselves. They probably had slavery early on, like many societies throughout Earth history have, and they went on to forge a great civilization and perhaps an empire across local space with many colonies. Wondrous technologies were developed that exceeded the capabilities of Federation science. Some cataclysm befell this empire, and it came crashing to the ground, resulting in an Orion Dark Age where much knowledge was lost, both technical and historical. The colonies became separated from each other, accelerating cultural divergence between genetic offshoots and leaving the location of the Orion's true homeworld in question. Piracy, while it probably existed beforehand, became a much more common way of life for the Orion people in this post-apocalyptic paradigm. The Orions may have even descended fully into anarchy, paving the way for the libertarian anarcho-capitalist system they possess in the shows. Wealth began to accumulate in the hands of a few powerful families, one of which was the Tendi family. Within the past few centuries, the Orions reinvented various technologies associated with space travel, and at some point, male subservience was officially codified into law, or at least became the de facto social order, before presumably being softened by the 24th century. Women are still the politically dominant sex in Orion society, and to this day, I continue to let Tendi dominate my body. With that, thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoy my videos, be sure to leave a thumbs up down below and don't forget to share it. That stuff really helps me out. If you haven't subscribed yet, be sure to do that as well so you won't miss future uploads, and click the bell icon to receive all notifications. If you want to support my work even further, you can become a patron at patreon.com/OrangeRiver, link in the description, or become a YouTube member by clicking the join button on my channel page. I just want to give a quick shout out to all of my donors who allow me to bring on outside talent like editors to make more high quality content for you to enjoy. By becoming a patron or member, you also get access to awesome perks like behind-the-scenes photos and videos, patron and member-only polls, name in the credits, merch discounts, and more. Or you can drop a one-time super thanks or PayPal donation. All are appreciated. Links to my PayPal as well as my social media and merch store are in the description too. Also, just as a reminder, I do have a second channel, OrangeRiver Plus, where I've uploaded the VODs of lots of my gaming streams, with more on the way. And in addition to some other goofy one-offs and extra behind-the-scenes content, I've officially made it my second streaming platform. So be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any new content. That's all I have for this week. Live long and prosper. Do you like merchandise? If so, head on over to the new and improved OrangeRiver merch store. That's right, OrangeRiver is now officially on Spreadshop. I've got a bunch of awesome new designs, including All the Way Down,
All the Way,
Vape God, Tally, aka Best Girl,
it was totally worth it.
and what is perhaps my greatest design yet,
I love being married to my husband.
Plus, I've got some of my classic designs like OrangeRiver Arrowhead, N7, and more. And there are even some new products like OrangeRiver hats. That's right, OrangeRiver hats now exist. Visit the link in the description to get discounts and other special deals on items from my store.